Over the past 15 years, I've taught students from all different backgrounds, from grade school to college, from poor to rich, from low performing to high performing. And again, certain patterns have emerged which determine the difference between success and failure. Today, I'm going to distill these years of experience into 3 actionable steps you can take today to learn and retain information and give you an unfair advantage over 99% of people. The first upgrade we need to achieve is what I call level 1. Stop confusing rewards-driven learning with purpose-driven learning. You've probably heard people tell you that in order to learn better and faster, we should set up a series of rewards for ourselves. Give ourselves a special meal or watch our favorite show in order to reward ourselves after completing a learning task. Research has shown, and any teacher knows, that the more recognition we get as a student, or more points, or the more stars we get, or whatever, the harder we'll generally work in order to achieve that learning outcome. But we all know what happens after we take that test or complete that assignment, right? The knowledge we learn just gets practically dumped right out of our brain in about 2 to 3 weeks. So how do we actually retain more of what we learn long term, starting from today? Well, let's take one of my past students, call him Jimmy, as an example. You see, Jimmy struggled with writing, didn't like school, and wasn't very motivated by grades. And I was given the special challenge of helping him improve his writing. So instead of starting with a boring lesson on writing skills, I simply asked Jimmy, what do you really like doing outside of school? And like most kids his age, he answered, playing video games. So I kept the questioning process going to find out what was his favorite game. From there, all we did was create a project for him that he could directly and immediately apply to his life. I found out he really wanted to invite his friend over to play video games with him, but he was a little too shy to do so. So guess what essay project we worked on together? An essay in his voice addressed to his friend, convincing him on why it would be a great idea to come over and play their favorite video game. Without realizing it, he became motivated not only to build his writing skills, but also to retain what he learned. Because ultimately, what he really wanted to do was get better at expressing himself to his friend. You see, he, like most of us, didn't actually lack the ability. He lacked context and purpose. Have you ever had a learning experience like this? Well, here's how you can do the same thing in your life no matter what you're learning. Step 1, identify the thing you're having trouble learning. Well, that shouldn't be difficult, right? Step 2, figure out something directly relevant to your life that learning this skill or this topic would actually help you with. Really think deeply and get creative about this, just like we did with Jimmy. You may have to do some mental gymnastics here, but you can almost always find something in your life that you like to do that's linked to the skill that you need to develop. And step 3, create a project that's tailor-made and relevant to your life that you actually have an interest in completing. That could be an essay, a speech or presentation, programming some code to build some specific software you want to work on, building a chair, it could be anything. And then create a study plan around that project. In fact, this is very similar to how the Montessori system of education works, and using even this one method could completely change your life. But let's not stop there, because once we've achieved this level of purpose-driven learning, we can use this to drive momentum toward what I call level 2, self-efficacy driven learning, whereby we can sustain this learning process by creating enjoyment in the activity itself, even if this subject is something we currently hopelessly struggle with. In order to understand how we create this effect, let's understand first how we destroy it. Throughout all my years of teaching all sorts of test prep, from SAT to ACT to ISCE to SHSAT, the whole alphabet soup, I started to realize that one of the core reasons students were struggling so much was that they were taking too many practice tests and overstudying. Yes, it's a myth that more study and more review creates better results. I remember a specific case of another student, let's call him Johnny, who came to me after having done more than 20 SAT practice tests and was hopelessly frustrated because his score wasn't improving at all. And of course, he felt like a failure. And as you could expect, this killed his motivation to put more effort into learning. How we addressed this was that for weeks of working together, we didn't work on one single practice test. Instead, we covered lessons on each individual skill on the test, individual grammar rules, punctuation rules, reading techniques, and we focused on mastering one skill at a time. Mastering punctuation led Johnny to become more confident that he could master parallelism, which led him to being more confident on being able to master the next skill set and the next one. In fact, he became excited, and I could tell he was now enjoying the learning process. Finally, we put everything together with practice tests of individual sections, and then and only then would we finish off by doing full practice tests. And he went on to improve his score by over 200 points. Once again, like most of us, it wasn't that Johnny lacked ability. Instead, he lacked what psychologists call self-efficacy, or essentially proof to yourself that you can do something. We naturally enjoy doing things we're good at, and the more we demonstrate proof to ourselves of our ability, the more motivated we become to learn, because now we're enjoying the activity itself. What are some ways you can replicate what we did with Johnny in your own life? Well, you see, it's all about incremental learning. Step 1, identify the big learning task you have. It could be learning how to build a chair, getting an A in your chemistry class, learning the 500-page finance manual for your job, job, starting a new business, whatever. Step 2, break down this big learning task into smaller bite-sized pieces and categorize those learning tasks in order of importance and urgency. And step 3, schedule your learning. You see, it's not just what we have to learn, but when we have to learn it. Not every bite-sized piece we broke down has equal weight or priority. We can easily fail at this step by trying to learn the right things in the wrong order. At the same time though, mapping out everything we need to learn in a huge list of priorities can be extremely overwhelming and can actually kill our motivation to learn. What's the solution? That's where we have to now upgrade to level 3, the 3 S's. The first S is scaffolding. We just talked about how important it is to prioritize each task in terms of urgency and importance, but sometimes it's hard to know because we're a newbie how to prioritize those tasks. I mean, how would we know? So if you're not directly working with a coach or tutor who's laying out a curriculum plan and a study plan for you, the best way you can figure this out for yourself is 1, figure out which skill or knowledge you would need foundationally in order to get started with the project in the first place. So for example, when I was taking physics at Columbia, I honestly felt so lost because I had never taken a physics course in my life. And so a lot of the concepts seemed confusing to me. So I honestly asked myself, what knowledge, if I knew it, would make these physics problems a lot easier to do? And the answer, if you know anything about physics, was learning how to do derivatives. And from there, instead of making a long list of all the skills that I needed to know in order to do physics, which ends up being a lot more than just taking derivatives, I drilled down on practicing this one skill set with many different problems. And then as I practiced this skill, something magical happened. I started to realize other skills that I needed to develop for physics in the process. If you're just getting started, that's a much more organic and stress-free way of identifying the skills you need to develop. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I had so many resources available to me at Columbia, from professor office hours to study groups to the tutoring center. And it goes without saying, you should always take advantage of resources like that if they're available. But if they're not, this scaffolding method will help you out a ton. The second S is schedule. Okay, so I'm sure we've all heard this before, that we need to schedule in our study time instead of just doing it whenever. But I want to point out an important reason why you probably haven't considered. Yes, it's true that time blocking our study habits and learning progress makes it very clear to us when we're going to establish certain milestones and make certain study progress. But even more important than that, scheduling in and time blocking our study time puts a sort of mental barrier up between our study time and our rest and relaxation time. I've seen too many students, including me, crash and burn because there wasn't a clearly established barrier and time blocking in terms of study time and rest and recovery time. Even if we love what we're learning, our brains literally have to have some rest and recovery time and have that on a regular basis in order to perform at peak levels. So scheduling literally takes some of the stress off. The third and final S of these 3 S's is storytelling. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are what are called epic poems, and they're hundreds of pages long. But before they were written out as books, they were part of oral tradition, meaning people literally memorized them word for word. How is this possible? Because our brains are literally wired to remember stories. I've had students come to me all the time looking for help to memorize vocabulary, and they've had just so much trouble. Most of the time, students are told to just memorize the words. That's right, just shove them into your brain somehow. Have you ever been told to memorize words this way? Well, one of the reasons stories are so helpful for memorization is because they activate emotional centers of our brain, which are powerful at storing memories. How I've used this principle with vocabulary is to take a word, say anathema, which means something that is strongly disliked. I might remember this in a silly way, like remembering I know somebody named Anna who I really dislike. We can use something sad, silly, loving, hateful, or basically tie the word to any strong emotion. And we can even directly make up a story to help us remember things like lists of items, sets of equations, steps in a process, or almost anything. And better yet, this method helps us to retain this information long term. So for example, let's say we're learning how to sell insurance or a house or consulting services, etc., and we have to remember everything we're supposed to say and how to respond to every objection or remember every fact or figure we need to present to the client. Well, nothing beats actually doing it, messing up, and learning from that mistake. But before we go into these interactions, we can literally write out and make up a short story about a fictional sales interaction. Be sure to make it emotional and include you presenting such and such facts and figures, include you responding to the possible objections, and just watch how this will boost your ability to memorize those dry but necessary facts. Don't believe me? Let's try a version of this right now. Studies have shown that most people can't recall a list of 10 words like this one if given a few minutes to study it and memorize it. But the vast majority of people can memorize it if they make up a short but silly story about it just like this. The knight visited the castle and realized the clock on the computer was wrong. It was also very messy there, so he decided to use his spoon to pick up the socks on the ground. Afterward, he took his sailboat out on the water where there was a firefly, but his boat ran out of batteries. Then, all of a sudden, he turned the doorknob on one of the doors of the boat and found pizza on the other side. Now, the reason you're actually going to remember these words now is because of how silly this story is, and the fact that you've actually visualized the story in your mind, haven't you? And images tied to emotions are much easier for our brain to remember than cold, dry facts. The thing is, stories are things that are meant to be told to others. So our memory of the topics, facts, or skills we're learning will be even more memorable if we share those stories with others for the purpose of teaching them or presenting it to them. Ideally, the purpose-driven learning project that we established in level 1 should have some element of teaching involved in the final project. If we're learning how to code by working on building a video game we want to build, it should ultimately involve our explaining to others how we built it. If we're learning a new language we want to learn, it should ultimately involve our having conversations with others learning the language to show them how we're using the new vocabulary or grammar. And if we're learning something like sales or entrepreneurship, it should ultimately involve our teaching and training others how to do aspects of what we've learned so we can create leverage and scale our business. If these methods don't seem to work for you the first time, don't give up. Working through these 3 levels of learning takes time, repetition, patience, and persistence. And believe me, you got this. If you want to learn even more strategies to take your learning power to the next level, then be sure to watch this next video.